Good afternoon, guys. Thanks for tuning into the Glacial Shield podcast. I'm your co-host, Gilded Aegis, and I'm joined today by...
Winter.
Cool, thanks, Winter. Just a brief background on myself. I started gaming when I was 5 or 6 years old. I started playing a lot of Pokemon and Mario, and as I got older, I started to find a lot of fun in shooters like Halo, Gears of War, Call of Duty, and these days a fair bit of Destiny 2. And I also enjoy playing RPGs like KOTOR 1 and 2 and Mass Effect. Winter, what did you like when you were a kid?
All right, so I'm going to date myself right off the bat. I grew up playing Tetris when I was a little kid. I eventually moved into Pokemon, like I'm pretty sure most people in our generation did. After that, my first introduction to kind of mainstream big games was Halo. I used to sneak up to my buddy's house to play it. M-rated games were banned in my family home, and playing video games anytime except on the weekend for 1 hour was also banned. These days, I play more strategic video games. I play a lot of StarCraft, and for fun, I play things like Call of Duty. I'm also really into story driven games like Bioshock. Now that the introductions are done, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of an oversight of our day. This is just a basic plan of what we want to do, and maybe in the future, we're going to figure out a way to state it a little better. But for today, we're going to go over some general gaming news. Then we're going to breach the topic of DLC and microtransactions. Then we're going to move on to line service versus standalone releases. And then we're going to have a brief chat about remakes. And then we're going to move on to an open chat. And the intention of our open chat is to describe things that we're interested in that aren't video games, just to see what you guys think is interesting for potential topics in the future. All right, Aegis, let's talk about general gaming news and delays.
Cool. So I guess the big one for you and I, Winter, is we're both big fans of Halo, and right off the hop this year, we were really expecting to have Halo Infinite by now and be really like knee deep into playing a lot of multiplayer and maybe glitching out of the maps and stuff. But it seems like uh, 343, likely rightfully so, has delayed the game yet again. So we're looking at what's probably going to be expected to be released somewhere either in spring 2021, but a lot of fans are actually hoping that it's delayed until fall of 2021, just because uh, what we saw from the E3 press conference release, it didn't look like the game was polished like it should have been at that point. Um, what do you think about Halo Infinite right now, and just how it's not released and how we're waiting after over 5 years for a new Halo game?
Well, I guess first of all, I'm fine with the delays. I would prefer to get a good game than a rushed game. And I don't actually believe that Halo 4 or Halo 5 were that good of a video game. I think that what I'm hearing from 343 sounds like good news in general. It sounds like they heard the fans, the complaints, especially about Halo 5, and they're putting in the effort to fix the game. Now, when it comes to the delay, I think their attempt at, and this is just my interpretation, maybe misleading the fans about how properly put together the game was and how confident they were when they went into the open show of the campaign. I think that kind of led to some of the anger and frustration. They tried to present it as a complete game when I think most people, including them, realized it was not a completed game.
Agreed. I think the big thing that we're keeping in mind is like we haven't even seen a glimpse of the multiplayer yet, and like that's really what keeps Halo like flowing through for a couple of years. Right? Like I can recall, playing a lot of Halo as a kid, and it was mainly dominated by multiplayer, but we haven't even seen what the new multiplayer is going to be like. Now, there's a lot of rumblings about it potentially being a battle royale game mode, kind of like Fortnite or PUBG, but there's some people that are not quite on board with that because it doesn't really feel like Halo, but it kind of is evolving with the times because we're seeing a lot of games that are like trying to implement these game modes to, you know, capitalize on what's popular right now. And it'd be nice if Halo could pull it off. I think it could be kind of like a maybe like King of the Hill, but like on crack per se. What do you think?
Um, well, I mean, I've always been a SWAT boy, which means that I was never into the more massive multiplayer modes. And I'm not the biggest fan of PUBG-based games, battle royale games. However, I've been playing Call of Duty lately. Most of you won't know, but I took about a 5-year break from gaming. I came back and all of this was brand new. To me, Call of Duty did it right. It has an existing, I'm keep calling it a PUBG style, but I guess people call it Battle Royale style mode that's been tied into the new release Cold War. And the two separate games also have their normal multiplayer. And to me, it never offended me that Call of Duty moved the way of having that Battle Royale mode. Because in my experience, at the very least, it has not negatively impacted the multiplayer side that I'm more used to. And as long as that's the way it is with Halo, I don't see it being an issue. If they support both sides, they support the growing fan base, and they support the old and the new fans, I don't have a problem with it. Um, and with that being said, I do think the lack of show of multiplayer so far, especially given what they were willing to show with single player, is concerning. Now, what do you think about the infinite delay? And I didn't mean to use that word, but the indefinite delay of the game compared to, say, Cyberpunk, where we've been given repeated dates that have then been repealed. Do you prefer the we don't know when it's going to be released except for sometime in 2021, or do you prefer what Cyberpunk's done where they keep telling us, okay, next month, never mind, it's going to be the next month over and over again? Which method do you prefer there?
So on the one hand, you have like this repeated attempt to try and like reassure the fans that it's coming, but in the case of Halo, they don't really know, but they're at least pretty positive it'll be releasing next year. So it's really it's funny because like, do you want to be reassured and then also let down when Cyberpunk inevitably gets delayed again? But it comes back to that old adage, a delayed game is going to be eventually amazing, but one that's rushed to release, is always going to be frowned upon and like looked down that it's a failing because it's rushed just to try and meet the market. So I think, I mean, I kind of like the infinite approach where they don't want to like get the fans' hopes up by saying it'll be releasing in spring when it might be delayed again. But it would be nice to have some kind of like timeline where they have an approximate idea of when they're going to release it. You know what I mean?
Right. And I think part of what's, at least for me, the concern about the indefinite delay, and this goes for Cyberpunk and Halo, is it could be a scenario like Duke Nukem. These games are highly anticipated, they are bleeding edge technology, but 1 year from now, or potentially 2 years from now, especially in the case of Halo, they might not longer be that bleeding edge technology. They're falling behind and they're allowing themselves to become not the newest game to show off the best graphics, to show off the new, really quick reaction gameplay. And in the case of a game like Duke Nukem, where they delayed it and they delayed it and they delayed it, it eventually just became another B-rated game that no one really enjoyed because of the outdated humor, the outdated graphics. They kept delaying it, trying to get it right, and eventually that caused it to be done wrong. Um, but in the meantime, with all these delays, we've seen the rise of party games that seem to be keeping us all very happy and enjoying ourselves during COVID. And terrible segue into the next gaming news. I was hoping we could have a brief conversation about the rise of party games like Fall Guys and Among Us. At least in my mind, I never pictured that free games. Actually, I don't think Fall Guys is free. I've never played it, but cheap indie games that are online multiplayer were going to become the next popular games. We're talking about bleeding edge graphics. We're talking about bleeding edge reaction times, visuals, play styles. And yet, Among Us is currently the top streaming game around. Everyone's playing it. What do you think of kind of the party game rise?
It's hilarious because this game I think launched 3 years ago, and they may have had a player base of anywhere from 20 to 100 max. And during COVID, a couple of different streamers thought, "Hey, let's try this game," and that gave a lot of this big rise, this sudden surge in popularity of the game. and it's still pretty popular today, like you're saying. I think it's hilarious because it's a very simple game. But it's really fun, and it kind of like it's it's really simple, but it's really approachable for people that aren't even really gamers. I know my girlfriend, she's not really a big gamer, but she saw this game and thought it'd be really fun to play. And it's really fun just trying to like corner, who did it or who killed who or who was in the event. How about you? What do you think of it?
Right. And it to me right away when I first saw it, the first thing I said, I was texting someone and I was like, "There's an online version of Werewolf now." I used to play that all the time when I was a little kid with my friends in paddling, and it just gave me that nostalgia rush. And in the current world, I think it's giving people an outlet to communicate, talk with other people safely, um, meet new people. I don't actually, I have Discord as of today because we're doing this podcast, but I have received a ton of requests from people saying, hey, join our Discord group. We want to talk, we want to chat after a game. And I think it's giving people that outlet of socialization that no one has right now. I also really appreciate, like you said, I've got friends who are not gamers and they would never identify as gamers. They would never buy the next big game, but they've downloaded this game. And I think it's finally transcended where these streamers are literally just picking up indie games, and not to be mean to indie games, but they're picking them up because they're cheap and that increases their profitability by buying these really cheap games and then bringing in a lot of views. They finally found one that is cheap, but it has such a strong base of mystery solving that appeals to so many people that it's finally broken past just the hardcore gamers that always want to be trying new game styles. Um, what do you think of that? Like in comparison to say Super Meat Boy or whatever it was called, that game that came out a few years ago. What do you think the difference between Among Us and Meat Boy was?
Approachability. Meat Boy, from what I remember, actually was pretty like a pretty. Was that the one that was like a pretty hardcore version of like Mario, pretty much?
It was.
So yeah, that seems like it's like a pretty hardcore game. It's a niche game because it's difficulty and also it's aesthetic, but the challenge is there for those that actually want it. Whereas Among Us, it's a different spin because it's simple, it's approachable, but also
Right.
it is a party game that can kind of like you have parties of 10 people, you get all your 10 friends together, and it's kind of like you're playing like a different style game like Jackbox games.
Right. And Jackbox was a game that I believe either you introduced me to or a friend of mine from Ontario at the beginning of COVID. And it was the same thing. Really kind of dumb little games that are really fun just because you have friends there. And I'm like you. I think it broaches the line of it's not super difficult like Meat Boy was. And also, Meat Boy was a single player game and intrusive, frustrating, and oversimple like Farmville used to be. And I think it finally hit that in the middle ground where gamers enjoy it, but also random Joe Blows enjoy it. And I think that was a great thing. I also think that the topic of Farmville is a great way to get into our next topic, which is DLC and microtransactions. Aegis, I'm going to let you start off on this one because I'm pretty confident my points of view do not mesh with the mass gaming industry.
That's a taboo word these days. Microtransactions. You ask any gamer, and it's going to automatically instill just a fearful idea or hateful ideology. They're going to think of EA as just this evil corporation who puts microtransactions in all of their games, and all of their games are underdeveloped for the most part. But is that really true? You know, you look at a lot of games today, and first and foremost, the price of games really hasn't changed a whole heck of a lot over the past 15 years. Like PS5 games now, they're $89. That seems expensive, but you know, games and the technology to make games have gotten more expensive. Bigger teams are utilized to make some of the more prominent games, and prices really likely haven't changed a lot to accommodate for the market and for wages and such. And so sometimes companies, they have to employ microtransactions or sometimes bigger DLCs to, offset the costs of operation. So there's sometimes where
Right.
microtransactions can actually be implemented fairly well, where they don't intrude on the gamers' earnings or negatively impact like the loot they can get in the game. Like cosmetic rewards, for example, uh, if they don't like tie into the game's lore or world, if they're kind of goofy, I think that's when they're like put in well. Think of like Halo 5. If you have like an emote where like he's on like riding like a unicorn, then you put the coordinate at the mall and he's riding the unicorn, it's goofy. That's funny. But if he's standing there with if he's like cleaning off a sniper rifle, that could be something that's kind of like earnable in game. It's the divide where these things that should be earnable in game versus are acceptable to be bought in the cash shop. What do you think, Winter?
Well, my exposure is initially from StarCraft, and I think it touches base on what you said about developers needing to have big teams, and more, in my opinion, more importantly, they need to have ongoing teams. Because as most people who've played StarCraft know, StarCraft didn't initially have a lot of microtransaction based options. However, when they got further into the lifespan, especially of StarCraft 2, microtransactions began to be employed. And in that case, I very much supported what was happening because our generation of gamers didn't grow up with ongoing updates. This generation, there's day one patches, there's day two patches, there's days 300 patches. People don't seem to understand or accept that people don't work for free. And a lot of the initial investment and payment of that first game release went into back paying the employees who worked on it. So to have continuous support for the game 3, 4, 5 years later, in some cases, it requires some form of income. And therefore, I supported StarCraft beginning microtransactions because they did have those updates. Now, on the flip side, I look at some game styles of microtransactions being very insidious to gaming and going after whales. Now, I do believe people they have their own free will to make choices, but we all know things are designed to go after addictive personalities. And I was going to talk about loot boxes because they're the most blatant example of going after people who like to gamble. But I kind of want to talk about another side of addiction too, and probably one that gets talked about less. The Dead or Alive series, in my opinion, is actually a very good fighting game, very entertaining. Of course, we all know some of the other things it's famous for, but that's where it begins to get insidious. There's multiple battle passes or season passes for the new Dead or Alive game that cost almost $130 each, and the bulk of those passes are literally just sexualized costumes for characters. And that is very insidious. It's targeting people who either have an addiction or have a need that they want filled. And it is not cheap. And the cost of making those skins versus what they're selling them for because they know they're targeting down the whales, that it is an equivalent. And I think that type of microtransaction, for one thing, it's not even a microtransaction anymore. When the cost goes over a couple bucks, it really is you're paying for the equivalent of a game and a half for 50 megabytes worth of data. And that's where I start to see it as very insidious. Um, Now, I was wondering, Aegis, there's also the other side to microtransactions, and that is battle passes. I screwed up the words there a minute ago when I called a season pass like with Dead or Alive, but I'm talking battle passes like Call of Duty and League of Legends. What do you think of games where, say, Apex is free and therefore they're paying for their game by having these season passes, these battle passes, versus Call of Duty where you basically paid $90 for a game and now they're expecting you to pay another $10 every month and a half in order to get the new content. What do you think of that?
It's kind of funny because if the game is free, then you're more inclined to buy the season pass or the battle pass because It's, well, the game's free, you're trying to support the developers, and hey, you might even buy a cosmetic or two for that reason, and then some. And then even if you think of the battle pass, say from Fortnite, it might cost $10, but you also, over the course of completing the battle pass, you get enough like virtual Fortnite money to be able to buy cosmetics and skins in the game. So while you're technically not getting your money back, it's like you're earning an equivalent value by just playing the game like you're going to anyways. But with COD, you're buying the game, and then you're also buying the battle pass to get more unlocks for, Warzone or its
Hmm.
battle royale, and that's where it's kind of fuzzy because you're supporting the company by getting their game, but you're also going to buy their battle pass. Something to keep in mind there is in
Right.
this example, I believe Warzone is free. I don't think I paid for Call of Duty, the newest Call of Duty, in order to get access to Warzone. So you don't necessarily have to buy the main game in order to get access to their battle royale. But the trend might be there where you got these diehard Call of Duty fans that are going to buy the newest Call of Duty every year because they love COD, but they're also going to buy Warzone and then the Battle Pass because they love COD and they want to eat more of it up.
Right. And in my experience, one of my issues with these battle passes, and I want to straddle a line here because I actually like Call of Duty's battle pass because I've been able to earn enough coins each season to buy the next battle pass. So besides the first $10 investment, I haven't had to pay again for almost 4 seasons. However, I draw the line at part of the battle passes are guns, and I'm not sure, and I might have to take it back because maybe the guns are part of the free wins as you level up, but I'm not sure that all of them are. Part of my difficulty is when you win a reward from these battle passes, that is not just cosmetic or not something that's just earnable. It's straight up a new gun that is not otherwise in the game or something like that. Because to me, that can create balance issues. It creates access to where players who are willing to pay have access to something that actually causes problems for people who aren't willing to pay. And there's a lot of gray lines there because if you're willing to pay to win, I guess at the end of the day you're willing to pay to win. And I think all of this leads into our next topic, which I'm going to introduce, which is standalone releases versus live services. And even though I really wanted to talk about this topic today, I find the line is getting more and more blurred because we're having these standalone release games, or at least what I would call a standalone release game, that is continuously having live services attached to it, including DLCs that are um, story driven and multiplayer driven. So while I'm introducing this topic, please know that we are aware that the line is starting to blur. But Aegis, I wanted to talk today about live service versus standalone releases. And for those who don't understand what we're trying to discuss, we would consider a live service something like Halo Infinite, a game that intends to exist for the next 10 years and be the basis for all future releases, or say StarCraft, where there was the official StarCraft 2 game and then two more games released on that and 10 years of live patches added on, um, versus say a Bioshock game where there was Bioshock 1, Bioshock 2, Bioshock 3. And of course, Bioshock 2 and 3 had DLC, but they were very much standalone games. Aegis, what do you think is the difference between a the benefit of a standalone release versus an ongoing live service game? What do you think the benefits and the downsides are to the two sides of that?
Well, the benefit to the person that's buying the standalone game is, in an ideal world, you're buying a complete product where from start to finish it feels like it's one cohesive narrative. You're getting what you pay for. Now, the first game that comes to mind for me is Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. That game does not have any DLC. It's a complete story. There's no microtransactions. There's no DLC for it. And all the while, it was made under the umbrella of EA. So, even more surprises. And it's one of the best Star Wars games. But there's no DLC. And it's really funny because part of me, when I got to the end of the game, I just wanted to play more. I was actually hoping there'd be DLC on the way, like a spin off story involving one of the characters or something. But on the flip side, DLC or continued service, it's a way to keep the game's engagement numbers up. It's a way to keep player counts up, to keep people like talking about it, to keep it in the news, and it makes the games feel alive and alive for longer. You know, one that comes to mind for me
Right.
is Destiny. You got DLCs every 3 or 4 months, major common expansions every year, and you see the numbers actually trend up when the new releases hit, and they start to kind of taper off as the seasons go on, but then they rise again when the new content comes out. So it really keeps the player activity like alive, and it makes it feel like the world is maybe evolving. Uh, Another game that actually did DLC very well, I think, two, Witcher 3, uh, Hearts of Stone, and Blood and Wine. You beat The Witcher 3, and that's a complete story. It's an amazing story, one game of the year in 2015. But then you have Hearts of Stone and Blood and Wine. And the nice thing about those DLCs is they feel that they're actually their own story. Like fans back when they were first released, they felt that they could actually be launched as their own like game themselves for say $40 or $50. But no, they're actually anywhere from 10 to 30 hour narratives, and they're even more content than they expected. You still had to pay, I think, 15 or $20 for the DLCs, but the value was actually there. It was worth it and then some. What do you think, Winter?
Absolutely. Well, I, I guess I'm going to harken back to old school games, and they're pretty common games. Most people have played them. And that's Warcraft and RuneScape, because to me, that's the basis of what a good live service game is. And to me, the biggest thing about those live service games is they were multiplayer. And they supported that ever growing power creep. They supported that ever growing storyline with your friends. And that to me is where I see the basis for a live service is multiplayer. Because one thing that if I go forward with buying Call of Duty Cold War, and maybe these aren't the best examples, but the older Call of Duty games, is when you had these standalone games, especially on the multiplayer side, you were restarting every few years. And it got annoying because you'd have all these guns unlocked, you would have all these cosmetics unlocked, and then you'd basically restart and begin working towards the same objective. However, I think where live service doesn't necessarily work is plot driven, especially single player games like, say, I'm trying to think of a good example right now, Destiny 1. When that game first came out, there was, and I know there were other errors and issues that caused this to happen, but there was minimal plot, there was minimal stability on weapon balance, and their excuse or their statement around it was, it's coming. In other words, it touches on what you said. The game didn't feel complete. The game felt like it was intentionally having holes punched into it in order to support continued live service. And to me, if that's the way gaming is going, if I pick up Halo Infinite in a year and it feels like the story drops off the side of the cliff, or it feels like the story isn't even necessarily there yet, that's where these live service games start to fail. I don't want to buy that base game for $90 and find it empty, uninspired, waiting for feedback from the fans to see what direction they want to go. I want to see a game like StarCraft 2 that came out right off the gate, punching, great multiplayer, decent storyline. I don't think any of us are ever going to claim that StarCraft storyline isn't cheesy. Um, but it was a full game. And 10 years later, it is still a full game. They use that live service to support not only an ongoing balanced multiplayer, besides when you're talking about Terran, um, they used it to add on new full story modes, and the graphics got better over time. The way the game worked got better over time. New maps were put in, but it didn't feel empty off the bat. And another example from Blizzard, nonetheless, is Diablo 3. It felt empty when it came out. It was unbalanced. You had the auction house, and they waited for all this feedback from people before they started making live updates. And it killed the game. And they thought that what was going to happen is they were going to use their live service to adjust to everything everyone wanted. And And that's not right. To me, if that's what your version of live service is release a partially finished game and wait for feedback and then charge people to take advantage of that feedback, I don't think I don't support that side of service. Um, Now, I guess I don't have a smooth transition to the next topic, but there is also the option to not just not add on to your game. There is the option to just re-release your game multiple times. Hi, Final Fantasy. Hi, Kingdom Hearts. Let's talk remakes. Aegis, go ahead.
So first and foremost, when I think of remakes, I think of Halo. I think of Halo CE Anniversary, Halo 2 Anniversary, The Last of Us Remastered, Demon Souls Remastered, Final Fantasy 7 Remastered, like you just said. You know, at first glance, it's like super exciting to be able to play an old game that you played when you were younger, just to try and relive those nostalgic feelings. But when you get into it, what is it really? Is it just capitalizing on nostalgia just for the sake of a quick buck? Sometimes, yes. For how pretty Halo 2 is, it's still Halo 2. The cutscenes by Blur Studios, beautiful. The brutes look amazing. Spartan, Locke in the opening cutscene, and the Arbiter, chef's kiss. Like, amazing. But the gameplay, it still feels like Halo. And what's the difference between popping in Halo 2 Anniversary versus just going in and playing old Halo 2? If anything, old Halo 2 is more nostalgic because it looks the exact same as it did when it was 2004. Uh, but there's times where,
And there's
sorry, go ahead, Winter.
my apologies. I just wanted to step in really quick on that because I actually disagree with you. One of my primary complaints about the Halo 2 anniversary was the fact that when I buy a remake, I want it to look modern. And I'll get into that in more detail on my side, but to me, part of my complaint was that the Halo 2 gameplay for the remake didn't look like a modern game. And I apologize for cutting in. Please go ahead.
No, and it still looked like a Halo game, but the graphics were turned up a little bit. But it still looked like Halo 2004, just upscaled fidelity. But there's times where it's done right, and I kind of look to Final Fantasy VII for that because it's a modernized spin on the OG Final Fantasy VII because it's got the amazing story of the old game, but it's got more of the combat and the fluidity of the more recent games, which some fans might like, some fans might not. I personally really like it, but there's games where it does feel like it's another grab. Take for instance The Last of Us. Now that released on PS3 just before the launch of PS4. And then within a year of the PS3 release, they released a PS4 version. They called it a remastered version. And I just had to really wonder what the heck changed between the PS3 version and the PS4. Like, the graphics going from PS3 to 4, they couldn't have changed like by an outstanding margin. And really, it feels like a cash grab. And an example from today is Spider Man PS4. You know, Spider Man Morales for PS5. I believe if you purchase the Ultimate Edition, you also get access to Spider Man from 2018 on the PS4. And the graphics for that, they don't like with ray tracing. Okay, then that gets into some questions. Like it looks nicer, but is it really worth the price tag to buy the Ultimate Edition for Spider-Man Morales to get access to this game that's not even 3 years old? What do you think, Winter?
Well, I guess, and again, this is because I'm just getting back into gaming, but my question to you is what did that Final Fantasy remake cost? Was it a full price game?
It was a full price game, and it's also not even the full story, which then raises some questions. I think it's the full story in Midgar, if I remember right.
So this is a $80 game. And the way I'd counter argue this is even though, and I get it, this is for the fans. If they're satisfied, they're satisfied. The company's done right. However, I would argue that when Final Fantasy VII was first made, there was a creation time that existed, developing the story, developing the characters, developing the music. And that's no longer there in the remake. All they are doing is reskinning, retooling, and in some case, speaking the lines of the game. The initial development is not there. And to me, therefore, it doesn't justify charging the full price of a game. And I was playing and admitting I fall into these traps. I bought the BioShock remaster the other day. It was all three games: BioShock 1, 2, and Infinite. And I paid, I think, $25 because I got the Black Friday sale. But I think the full price game, when I looked at it, was almost $100. And it took me aback because all they did was reskin the game. And to be honest, the most recent Bioshock Infinite still looks very modern. These games look good if you go back and play them. So people are paying over $100 for games they've already bought before, that the only difference is the graphical increase. And I don't necessarily support that. But then you have a game like Resident Evil 2, where it's been, oh God, how long has it been since the Resident Evil 2 came out? 15 years?
Uh,
And they basically,
yeah, it's been that long, if not longer.
yeah, so Resident Evil 2, it's been a very long time. There was a lot of demand from people for that game, and it is gorgeous. It doesn't even look like the same game. And I guess to me that time frame, the huge gap between the releases, the demand from the fans, um, I guess that sort of justifies it. Because when I bought Halo 2 Anniversary, all I could think about was, man, I'm going to get to play my favorite game of all time with modern graphics. And then I saw the actual gameplay. And I couldn't believe that it was not updated to modern graphics. Um, it was a letdown to me. And I saw that as they fed off my nostalgia, and they fed off my desire to see the beautiful new cutscenes, and it was lazy. Um, and I'm not sure how they could do that right, because the issue with remakes has always been they want to get it close to home because people are expecting to play the same old game, but it also has to be new enough that it's not just you're buying the exact same game. Can you think of any examples of remakes that actually gave you enough new content to justify paying the full price for a full game? Can you think of any examples?
I'm just trying to think right now, honestly, because I mean, because I was gonna say Demon Souls remastered, but even then, aside from like the it's amazingly beautiful right now, the new game, or it's a remaster of the PS3 game. It looks beautiful. The attack animations, finishers, backstabs, the bosses look gorgeous. But in a lot of like details that I've read, the core gameplay is still the same. So any janky combat that was there in the old game, it's still there. Uh, there's no
Right.
there's no sixth archstone, which gave you access to a sixth area that was never developed. Now the Blue Studios, they never actually developed that, and that was to keep the feel of old Demon Souls there. But I guess a remake that I can think of really. Have you played Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver?
Ah, you're going where I was going to go. I was about to go to Pokemon Silver. I wasn't going to go to Heart Gold or Heart Silver. I was going to say Pokemon Silver, giving you a free playthrough of the entirety of Pokemon Red, Blue, and Green as part of the other game. That was where I was going. But go ahead with your topic.
Well, exactly, because not only do you get access to Johto, the new Gen 2 region, but you also get access to Kanto, the Gen 1 region. And it's a nostalgia trip to go back there and like play through the old bosses like Brock and Misty and Lieutenant Surge. But then you go into Mount Silver, and then you fight Red. That's the ultimate cherry on top because you fight the old like Pokemon Master. And then fast
Right.
forward, I think it was 15 years later, they launched Heart Gold and Soul Silver, and that came out in Gen 4. That came out in a lot of the time when a lot of like combat updates were made to the game, which were crucial. The special physical split, uh, new typings. They merged the storyline of Pokemon Crystal with Heart with Gold and Silver to make a larger narrative. They added a couple of new areas. Uh, Once you completed the game, you got access to the I think part of the Gen 3 and Gen 4 Pokedexes. Professor Oak gave you different starters. You could go fight Groudon and Kyogre, Rayquaza, the Gen 4 legendaries, Giratina. Uh, I don't remember the other two, but you know what I mean. It felt like it was worth the price, and that coupled with the fact that it's a handheld game, I think it was only $49 or $44 at the time, so it was even more worth it. It wasn't like they were trying to gouge you per se.
Right. And maybe that is going to be my end statement around this topic is if you're going to make a remake, either you need to charge half price or less, realizing people already paid the full price for this game, and you're not having to go through the entire development that you've done before. Therefore, you don't deserve to charge full price. Or you have to add content. And my suggestion for, say, Halo 2's remake is where were the extra levels? One of the most infamous things about Halo 2 was its ending. It dropped off the side of a cliff. And when I was a kid, I actually thought it was pretty cool. I was going to say bad butt, but I realized we're not swearing on this podcast. Um, I actually liked the end, but 90% of players didn't. There's a good example of where they could have done things right. They could have added in the known level Juggernaut that introduced the proto grave mines, which is an important part of Halo lore and was even partially in Halo 2 if you looked for it. And they could have introduced the fight through the Forerunner ship at the end of the game. Actually, that might have been called Juggernaut. So there was the Juggernaut ship, and then there was the Juggernaut flood form. I see why they didn't put them in the game. They couldn't decide which one should be called Juggernaut. So either way, what I'm saying is the addition of those two levels that they themselves said they cut because they just didn't have time to put them in the game would have corrected the only major complaint about Halo 2 that everyone has to this day. You would have gotten to finish playing the game as Master Chief. You wouldn't have had that cliffhanger ending, and you would have had the flood level that developed their lore. Why did they not go back and add those three levels in?
To the point, that
And to
point too,
me,
for the
that's
Halo 2 point. Sorry, just to cut you off. Um,
no problem.
you look at the anniversary. They only actually remade, I think it was 8 of the 14 maps, or even less than that. Why didn't they
Right, they
really?
didn't include the DLC, did they?
Well, they didn't. I think there was a. I don't know. They didn't make the full swath of what like maps that came out originally at launch. They remade a couple of DLC maps too, but they were probably the
Oh,
most
okay.
standout maps. Like they remade Relic, which was an old DLC map, which that gets into the Halo 2 DLC issue, which that's a different conversation. But they didn't upgrade the full swath of maps to be new.
And there's something I don't have a lot of background knowledge because for everyone who doesn't know me personally, which is everybody except for you, Aegis, I didn't have Halo 2 growing up. It's my favorite game, but my buddy was actually the one who owned it. So I wouldn't have known that those maps were not the full set. And maybe that's what they're taking advantage of is the people they know who are buying this game for the first time. That's not going to matter to them because they're not going to know. Because I didn't even know, and it's my favorite game of all time. And that was maybe the last bit that I had to add on to this remakes topic, and maybe some positive justification of them is these remakes introduce the new generation to the games we loved. My brother played through. Oh yes, by the way, everybody, I have a brother. My brother played through Halo 2 Anniversary with me, and it showed him what a hardcore old game was like because he insisted we could play it on hardened, and well, he couldn't play it on hardened even though he's beaten all the new Halos on legendary. It made him rage quit more than once, but he loved the story, and it actually showed him a good example of what a good storyline in a video game looked like, which I find a lot of games these days don't support good storylines. However, I think this is a good segue into our last topic, and that is our open chat. Because today we want to talk music, and music is yet another genre or topic that loves to rehash things they've already done. I'm looking at you, Judas Priest, and every one of your remasters that you release with one or two songs and one or two live versions of the same song coming out at, and calling it a new album. Let's talk music, Aegis. First of all, let's talk. What is your taste in music? Because even though it's similar to mine, it also varies somewhat heavily.
Isn't it funny? Like I'll ask this question to people these days, and people will say, "I like all music," but like, do you really? Like, if you're gonna jam out in your car, if you're driving home for the weekend, what are you gonna listen to? I'll probably pop in some Metallica, Iron Maiden, maybe some Dream Theater. But when I'm crunching through work, I actually really like listening to game soundtracks. Like a big one lately is the Destiny 2 Beyond Light OST. Really good. I'll pop in, I'll listen to Halo, like the Halo 2 OST. Just, it's something where there's no lyrics, but there's a good beat. It's nostalgic, it's fun to listen to, and I can just crunch through work. I mainly
Rock
like
Anthem to save the
rock and roll
world
or
while
metal.
working a desk job.
How about you? What do you like, Hunter?
Sorry about cutting in. I was just going to say you're listening to Rock Anthem to save the world while you're working your desk job. However,
It makes it feel better.
I, I'm sorry that was mean. I also work a desk job, so I'm also a loser. Um, well, I feel a little called out, and maybe that's why I called you out a little, because I am the person who's going to respond. I'll listen to just about anything. However, you're right. It's nuanced. I don't listen to just about everything, and even though I say that, it isn't true. I'm willing to give everything a chance is probably more the right answer. I've listened to music from the 1920s all the way up through to modern released a few months ago. But I have a topic or a not a topic, a genre of preference. I prefer metal, I prefer punk rock, and I prefer emo. Um, but when it gets into something like, say, country, I'm willing to recognize a good country song when I hear it, and I'm also willing to call out the yodeling sounding idiots that I don't think sound good when I listen to country music.
As you should.
So, right, as everybody should. However, I probably should take a more nuanced answer. I listen to a lot of music and I like exploring. For example, right now I'm listening through, and I know I pushed this on you and you haven't given me the chance to prove that it's good music yet because you haven't listened to it. Blind Guardian. I'm listening through their discography and I'm finding a lot of stuff I like. It's high fantasy music. They literally have albums that are based around the story of high fantasy. Um, it's never something I would have thought I would like, but I do enjoy it. Um, but again, my core basis, and like you said, when I'm driving in my car, would be metal music ranging from Metallica, Avenged Sevenfold, um, songs like that to emo and punk. And yes, that includes things like My Chemical Romance. And for the teenage girls out there that I apparently have the same taste in music as, Panic at the Disco and bands like that. And I'm not ashamed to admit it. Yeah, so I have a fairly big range of musical tastes. Um,
It's funny because there's a lot of
but
bands these days that are actually really good. Like you said, Avenged Sevenfold, and I completely forgot about them. I love Avenged Sevenfold. Sorry, go on.
no, 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 you're good. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's just a lot of different bands these days that are good. Like we have the luxury of being, as we are about 30, but we have a whole slew of different bands that are from today all the way back to the 60s, and for you like the older music, of course, even further back. But we have that luxury of just being able to listen to a bunch of different bands and be able to pick and choose what we like and don't like. I also
Right.
like
And
I
I
also like.
think,
Go ahead, sorry.
oh, I was going to say, I think that is another good point to talk about is the modern genres versus the classic genres. Because, like you said, you forgot about Avenged Sevenfold when you listed off bands that you like, but you like Avenged Sevenfold. We're close enough to the same age that you like modern metal, but you're not one of the people who only likes modern metal or only likes classic metal like we see so much of these days. I have tons of friends who only listen to modern metal bands, and I have older friends who will only listen to classic metal, like Iron Maiden, like Judas Priest, like Slayer. And I think that's kind of an interesting topic that maybe we should broach here is what do you think of the evolution of these genres? Like, obviously you and I both support years of music, but what do you think of all these people who say, oh, for example, I listen to teenage girl music because I listen to Panic at the Disco. Do you think it's fair to say that these genres of music are good or bad based on when they came out and who usually listens to them? Or do you think music should be looked at more in depth than that?
It's easier to see the surface value just saying, hey, this guy likes Panic at the Disco, but the typical audience might be like teenage girls, he said, but really, you know, their music is just more than just the sound. It's, the story it tells, and that's maybe where you're coming from it too. Like the story, like just the feel, the beat, the lyrics. Like even there's bands like you said, Avenged Sevenfold. Some of their albums are amazing. I haven't been the biggest fan of their newer stuff though. Maybe it's just because it's felt a little samey, but a
Mm.
lot of it also feels derivative or largely inspired. There's a couple of songs off of the album, like Hail to the King, and I immediately thought of, holy god, that sounds exactly like Metallica. That's a big Metallica influence. Like Metallica, Sad But True, sound a lot like what one of Avenged Sevenfold's songs is on that album. I can't remember what it's called either.
No, I'm blanking on it too, but I remember seeing that influence as well. And here's a question for you. People complain about the stage, and I'm not a big fan of the album The Stage, but it's too modern and Disturbs. What is it called? Was the album actually called Evolution? Disturbs' newer album. People complain about those. You called them zany. I would call them experimental albums. It doesn't sound like the band. It doesn't sound like classic metal. But then when the band releases something like Hail to the King, which was literally an album intended to show their respect for older metal, people complain that they're basically mimicking old metal bands. Where do you think the balance is on that, or do you think there's fair criticism to either side of that, that they're not developing, but then they're developing too much? Do you what do you think of that criticism?
Well, I think it's regardless of how you cut it, you're gonna have fans that either like or don't like your new stuff. And like these hardcore guys, like they might like old Metallica versus new Metallica. I mean, in that case, it's justified somewhat, but sometimes people kind of drive towards one sound more than another. The Metallica example is a lot of their older stuff is a lot thrashier. James Hetfield's voice, he still had that grit to it, that punch. And as he got older, and probably blew out his voice more than once, you started to see that tone that it had to take on his voice and his tone. But bands over time they kind of maybe lose some of that sound. If you listen to uh, Bring Me the Horizon, a lot of their sound earlier on, like that's a screamo band or metalcore, but they went from being doing a lot of screams to yelling to they do a lot of singing nowadays too, which seems weird because you think of that old sound from BMTH. It's pretty good. Their instrumentals are also fantastic. That's why I actually like a lot of metalcore songs. It's because their instrumentals, their bass, their guitar, their drums, they're very very potent. They're strong stuff. What do you think?
You kind of hit a few things, and I'm actually trying to remember everything I wanted to respond on this. You hit one thing about the development of bands. Um, there's one thing that most people don't bring up when it comes to the change of their sound over time is they're not kids anymore. And to further clarify that, bands like Metallica, when they first came out, they were much younger people, and to hear a young 20s man or woman singing about the gripes in their life and the issues and the difficulties they're going through and being angsty is probably too far of a word, but being angrier, being thrashier in the case of Metallica. Do you really want to hear someone getting into their late 40s and early 50s continuing to sing and sound like that? A good example is Eminem. He has grown in some ways, but he also hasn't grown in others. And sometimes what people are talking about when they complain about him is you're a late 40s man who's still complaining about the same issues you had when you were 18, 19, but you're a multimillionaire. And I guess maybe that isn't as tied into metal, but say punk and say Green Day. They released Dookie, which I know all of you are going to hate on Green Day. If any of you hate on the album Dookie, I'm going to argue with you. Dookie is a classic, famous punk album. And then they released Uno Dos Tres, which is this upbeat, frenetic, poppy sounding rock album. And while people want to complain about that, they proceeded to release Father of All mother blanks. And I think it's a good example of failed growth is Dookie was a good album because they were young people when they released that album. You could feel the angst, you could feel the anger, the teenage side of it coming out. And then they grew up and they got rich and they got better at music and they released Uno Dos Tres because they didn't have those complaints anymore. And then when they released Father of All Mother Blanks, people called it what it is. It was a bunch of rich capitalistic guys complaining about rich capitalism. And I guess to me, like, you have to expect that growth in bands because if they don't have it, people will complain. And I think I've gotten off topic and ranted a little here,
Well, I think either way,
especially because
people are going to complain about the music. Disturbed. They sound pretty samey. Like their older stuff was unreal because it was new. But as you move on, even past Indestructible, it sounds like they're still hitting those same beats, the same tone, the same guitar riffs, the same solos. It's you want some variation, but you still want to have that Disturbed feel. It's kind of it's like
right.
it's
And
a
then they
juggling act.
released
It's tough.
Revolution, and then they released Evolution, and nobody liked it because it sounded too different.
It's
So
tough.
I guess yeah, it's. But then okay, so here's a good example of, and this is going back to the metal route that we both have, is the Painkiller album released by Judas Priest versus Sad Wings of Destiny, one of their earlier albums. Painkiller is thrash, or there's a lot of thrash. There are songs that aren't, but it is a hard bumping album that I prefer. And Painkiller is probably one of my favorite albums of all time. But if you listen to Sad Wings of Destiny, you might even not realize it's the same band. And a lot of people prefer Sad Wings of Destiny to their later work, which is Painkiller. And it's because of what I was introduced to. I was introduced to Painkiller before I ever heard the other album or their older albums. Um, and because of that, I preferred the newer stuff. And it was vastly different. So I do think it also has to do with what you're introduced to, what you enjoy already. And I don't blame bands for wanting to experiment, but at the end of the day, you do need to still appeal to your fans, which we're not going to have any after I say that I supported the horse armor DLC from the Elder Scrolls games. Yeah, just so everyone knows, I think that the horse armor DLC was an example of cosmetic that didn't impact anything. And if you wanted to buy it, you could buy it, and if you didn't want to buy it, you didn't have to buy it. Um, I thought it was a good example of DLC. However, on the topic of music, is there anything more we want to add to this, or for today, do you think we've kind of had a little random back and forth about music and we're good to leave it for now? Call it a day.
Well, I think just a general note to end on for this is, you know, you like your bands, and if you like Metallica, their first album, Kill 'Em All, and you haven't ventured out into the other albums, like say the Black Album, which is a large departure from what you'd expect from Metallica, give it a listen to. Because I like the thrasher albums of Metallica, but there's some good songs in that Black Album. You know, Load and Reload get a bad rap, but there's a couple of bangers on those albums. The big thing with music is just don't be so closed-minded. It's easier to be trapped in your lane, but venture out because you'll actually find there's other good music even within your band or within your genre.
Right. And I guess I would even say to our metalheads out there who are like us, give different music a try. Aegis, I think I convinced you at one point to try Three Cheers for Sweet Revenge and The Black Parade, which are both My Chemical Romance albums. And I just quick answer yes or no. Did you wind up enjoying them?
Man, Three Cheers Sweet Revenge is one of my favorite grunge albums. Not grunge, sorry, but what's the genre there?
I'd call it emo punk. Some people might call it emo pop. I believe Black Parade is probably closer to emo pop. Um, but that's because I'm guessing the reason you prefer Three Cheers to the Black Parade is you can connect with Three Cheers a little better. Not to go into any personal stuff, but I imagine you connect with it a bit.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right there.
Right. So I don't want to go into any personal stuff, but to those of us out there who stay with their genre, and tend to look down on genres that you haven't explored, understand that there might be things in those genres that could draw them to you if you give them a chance. And again, another good example is Panic at the Disco. 2 years ago, you wouldn't have caught me dead saying that I would give that band a chance, but one day I was bored and I tried their album Death of a Bachelor, and I loved it. So I just want to say, I'm like you guys. I consider Panic at the Disco to be a high school girl band. Um, they're not even a band anymore. They're one guy. But I consider I would consider them to be that. And yet when I gave them a chance and I looked past that image, I really liked their music. And I guess I will end on that. Aegis, you suggested people give things a chance that have developed and grown. I would go outside of that and say try genres that you wouldn't expect you would like. You might be surprised what you connect with. We all have that emo kid in us. We all have that happiness in us. We all have that we want to swing along the country in us if we just let it out a little bit. Give it a try. See what you can do with yourself. Aegis, is there anything you want to say further, or are we going to wrap up this first attempt at a podcast? And in my first case, my first listen to a podcast, because I have never touched podcasts before this discussion. I've never been on Twitch, and I don't know what any of this stuff is. Is there anything else you would like to say before we wrap up?
You know what? Aside from just everything we've talked about, just I really thank anybody who's tuned in to listen to us today. Ramble on, a couple of guys who are trying to seem like we know what we're talking about, but really we don't. No, we had a really fun time today, and just thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, everybody, thanks for tuning in. I'm glad to be here again. Please forgive me. I have no experience with podcasts and I have no experience with Twitch. Aegis knows what he's doing a bit better. Um, but we're here to see if we can make this work. And especially during COVID, we're hoping to give you a few voices to listen to, laugh along with, and be entertained by. From me, have a great afternoon. Aegis, how about yourself?
Yep, thanks guys for tuning in. I'm Aegis, and we're signing off. See you later.
Bye now.